What would you do if you were in middle school and they forced you to fight in the battlefield? During World War II in 1945, the war was not going well for the Japanese. In the Pacific, Allied forces were heading towards Japan, and the Japanese decided to block their progress with a shield called the island of Okinawa. The Japanese Imperial Army took over middle schools and high schools in Okinawa. They reduced school hours and trained the students in skills that would help in the coming battle. They taught the girls nursing and taught the boys things like building structures, running communications cables, and yes, how to fight in combat. Orders were military training for the boys was supposed to be voluntary, but the army thought that restriction was annoying, so they worked around it. They ordered the schools to force their students to volunteer. The kids were underage. By law, they couldn't consent without their parents, so the military often forged the papers for them. The policy was only for boys 14 and older, but records show there were boys as young as 12. They threatened the kids who didn't want to take part, intimidated them, called them traitors. Students who still refused were sent home without food, sometimes at the point of a gun. We already talked in another video about what happened to the school girls during the Battle of Okinawa. This video is about the horrific things that the boys went through. Alright, so the schoolboys' military training was like being in the Boy Scouts, but with murder badges. They trained in sharpening ends of bamboo stalks with knives to make spears. They would practice jabbing them into figures of American soldiers. One survivor remembered as a boy having to stab a straw figure at the school entrance before going in. That was their morning ritual. After training, at least 1,787 boys were put into units called Tekketsu Kinnotai, or Iron and Blood Imperial Corps. Their first task? To write their will. On April 1st, 1945, a force of U.S. Army and Marines landed on Okinawa and the nearby islands. It was the last battle in the Pacific and the most bloody. Artillery shells rained down on the island immediately and rarely stopped. This battle was different from the others in the Pacific because Okinawa was a populated island. It was full of civilians, and we'll see how that fact made the battle a nightmare. The Japanese military did evacuate parts of the population, but most of the residents remained when the battle started. Imagine a war raging right in the middle of your town or city. Estimates say about 1/10 to 1/3 of the civilian population perished. That's up to 1 in 3 people. When the battle started, it was clear that the Japanese army was doomed. The army got more aggressive with the students. They drafted all the boys from their schools. It was mandatory now. They even sometimes recruited random kids they found hiding in caves. No need for official papers. The students had all kinds of jobs. They helped make buildings, they laid down communication wires, they ran supplies back and forth. And yes, they were even allowed to use guns. Many boys were shot if they refused to follow orders. Surrender was not an option for most of the students. Years of propaganda told them to die for the emperor. And everyone, kids and adults, just knew that the Americans tortured and committed all kinds of evil acts on Japanese prisoners. So to the kids, in front of them lay death by the Americans, and behind them lay death by Japanese soldiers. Many chose to kill themselves. But the truth was, the children's best bet was to surrender. Of course, what they were told about evil Americans was propaganda. Yeah, the relentless American bombing killed countless people, and American soldiers were known to shoot at kids, so let's not be black and white about it. But American troops generally protected civilians. Unfortunately, there were plenty of cases where the Japanese army did not have the same mindset. Civilians ran into the mountains and forests to hide in caves from the constant bombing and gunfire. Japanese soldiers were known to force civilians out of their caves so they could hide themselves. There were reports of Japanese soldiers using human shields and forcing civilians to walk into a combat zone to get shot and reveal where the enemy was. As the battle wore on, things got desperate, and soldiers would recruit civilians to join them on attack runs. One survivor recalled it happening to him. He was 14 at the time and wasn't even part of the Tekketsu Kinnotai. A soldier found him and his classmates and taught them how to use a grenade, then marched them into battle. Luckily, a lieutenant saw the group and stopped them. There seemed to be some miscommunication because he said there was no such order to use children in combat. War didn't involve children. He took the grenades and told them to go home. So why was there such disregard for civilian lives? Part of it was the nationalist culture of the time. The indoctrination started at elementary school. You were expected to give your life for the emperor and for the country. Soldiers just expected civilians to be good subjects and contribute to the cause. Japan could never lose a war. The imperial house had lasted for 2,000 years, and it would last forever. Kids sang nationalist and militaristic songs. One American soldier found a diary of an Okinawan boy who kept writing about his Japanese spirit and how he would die for the emperor if necessary. There are plenty of examples of the girl and boy recruits embracing the war, even as they were stuck in horrific environments. Another reason for the disregard of civilian lives was prejudice. Okinawans were considered different from mainland Japanese. Most Japanese soldiers couldn't even understand the Okinawan dialect. In fact, the Japanese army was worried about spies, so they forbade Okinawan soldiers under their command to speak the local dialect. Failure to comply resulted in execution. Boys in the Tekketsu Kinnotai were often tasked to find and execute spies, and they did. Which brings up the disturbing question of how did they find these spies? It was probably all imagined. This view of Okinawans as different persists to the modern day. The battle was relentless, and we see testimonies of boys realizing that fighting for the emperor was not as glamorous as they had thought. One former child soldier said, "I felt empowered because I was told I was doing this to protect the emperor of Japan. What I didn't know at that time was that the emperor of Japan had no plans to protect me." Another former child soldier, Yoza Shoken, tells us about his experience. The army ordered Yoza to submit a military application for a younger classmate named Kinjo, which he did. The classmate joined a different unit from Yoza. After Yoza served for a time, the commander told Yoza's unit that they didn't have enough food, so he'd let anyone who was not confident in his abilities leave. The commander probably just wanted to let some of the younger kids go home. Like good little soldiers, no one raised their hand, though Yaza believed that everyone wanted to go home. So the commander picked the boys himself, and he happened to include Yoza. That was how he survived. He later discovered that Kinjo, his younger friend, had died. Yoza, now in his 90s, has lived with guilt all his life. He holds himself responsible for Kinjo's death because he submitted the application. Other students were also ordered to submit applications for their younger classmates, but some of them just pretended that no one was home and threw away the documents. He asks himself why he didn't do the same. In the battle, desperate Japanese soldiers began carrying bombs on their backs, climbing onto tanks and blowing them up. They even strapped bombs onto boys to do the same. The tactic shocked the Americans for a while until they got wise to it. Suicide was a common theme. But there was the disturbing issue of group suicide among the Okinawan civilians. The fear of being captured by evil Americans was so great that people killed themselves rather than face being a prisoner. The Japanese military gathered people in groups and gave out grenades. Survivor accounts of what happened in these group suicides are harrowing. After the mayor of the village yelled, "Long live the emperor!" hand grenades exploded all around us. I could hear the screams of the dying. People killed their own families, then themselves. Most people didn't have access to grenades, so they used anything. Kitchen knives, ropes, rocks, items around the house, anything. There are stories from survivors who killed their own family members that are way too gruesome to talk about. One mother killed her daughter as the American troops got closer, only to have them arrive a few moments later and treat her humanely, giving her candy and cigarettes. Ishikawa Eiki's story shows the conditions that the Tekketsu Kinnotai students faced. He was assigned to a group of boys who did cooking duties for the soldiers. He had to dig potatoes from the ground while artillery shells fell around him. 2 weeks into it, a shell took the lives of 2 boys in the group, and Ishikawa thought, "We will all be like them sooner or later." His only concern was surviving. He didn't even think of his family. He and the other students only ate salted cabbage and sugar cane and drank dirty water from the ground. They never had a change of clothing. He came down with lice, like many others. They slept in underground bunkers. Ishikawa remembered wishing for 3 things before sleeping: to drink a clean glass of water, to sleep stretched out on a tatami mat, and to die without pain. One day before a battle, the Japanese soldiers gave him 2 grenades, one to throw at the enemy and one for himself. Ishikawa hid during the battle and saw Americans taking Japanese soldiers and civilians prisoner. He had a choice: throw one grenade at the Americans and then blow himself up, or surrender. Ishikawa tossed aside the grenades and walked out. It saved his life. Today, Ishikawa argues for removing US military bases from Okinawa. When war occurs, a city with a military base becomes a victim. I do have a positive story for y'all. Higa Takechiro was part of a US Army unit of Japanese Americans who served as translators. He spoke both Japanese and the Okinawan dialect. This guy was amazing. During the battle, he went around to caves that civilians were hiding in, telling them to come out. He assured people that Americans were not savages. They had food and water. They had medics to care for the injured. He did this over and over again. Being fluent in the local tongue probably won him a lot of trust. In total, he managed to convince about 3,000 people to come out of their caves and escape the battle. Some people admitted that they were ready to kill themselves if it wasn't for Higa. Afterwards, Higa said he was proud that he never fired a shot in the entire battle. And then we have a person who became famous in Okinawa, Ota Masahide. As a high school student, he was sent to the battlefield with a rifle and 2 grenades. When they had to retreat south, a wounded soldier pleaded with Ota not to leave him behind. The soldier's cry stayed with him for the rest of his life. A turning point for Ota came when he saw how the Japanese soldiers treated civilians. The Imperial Army kicked people out of caves. They used them for themselves. Young kids cried. Soldiers were afraid US forces would find the cave, so they ordered the mothers to kill their kids. The mothers could not kill their own kids, so soldiers did it. I saw this myself. Up until that time, I trusted the Imperial Army, as we were told. But to see this, I changed my mind, and I changed my thinking about war. Even after Japan surrendered, his superiors told him to keep fighting. A good Japanese gave his life for the emperor. Ota kept on fighting and hiding in caves for a month afterwards. He was afraid of American soldiers, yes, but he was even more afraid of the Japanese soldiers. They shot people who tried to surrender. Ota lamented that his classmates died the deaths not of humans, but of worms. Militaries absolutely do not protect civilians in war. That was the biggest lesson I learned from the Battle of Okinawa. Ota became a pacifist and became the governor of Okinawa Prefecture with a campaign promise to remove US military bases from Okinawa. He pushed for the creation of the Cornerstone of Peace, a monument in the Okinawa Peace Memorial Park and Museum. The names of those who died, civilian and military, are etched onto the monument. It was Ota's life mission to never let such a tragedy repeat. His dream was for an Okinawa free of military bases. Ota Masahide passed away in 2017 at the age of 92. When the battle was done, of the 1,787 boys of the Tekketsu Kinnotai, half of them had died. Alright, we have a new emperor patron, Nathaniel Annunziata. Welcome, you're awesome. We also have new patrons who are also cool people. Karen Cannon, Christian, Charlotte Suzanne, Stefan, Estelle Sky, Wild Lee Coyote, Meep Meep, Ricardo Maciel dos Anjos, and William Rhodes. Hey guys, check out the video about the high school girls forced to be nurses in the battle here. Or see this other video. Alright, much love guys, and spread the knowledge.